Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Deadpool and Wolverine. Let's talk about it. So Deadpool and Wolverine is directed by Shawn Levy, who also directed Free Guy and has become a frequent Ryan Reynolds collaborator. Now, Deadpool and Wolverine is arguably the most highly anticipated movie of the year, not only because it's the only MCU movie that we'll be getting this year, but also, of course, because it marks the entry of Deadpool, fan favorite R-rated character Deadpool, into the PC PG-13 MCU. Yes, when Disney purchased Fox all those years back, many of us were excited to see what Marvel Studios would do with all of the new Fox toys that it had acquired, Deadpool being one of the crowning jewels. And finally, with the release of this movie, we have gotten a chance to answer that question. So today I'm going to be diving into my thoughts on this movie. If that sounds fun to you, then stay tuned. And of course, as always, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now, without further ado, guys, let's get into this. So Deadpool and Wolverine is centered on none other than Deadpool and Wolverine. But yes, we get reintroduced to Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool, except this time around he is running around in a forest that looks very similar to the forest of Sokovia in Avengers Age of Ultron, but he's not in Sokovia. He is in fact in Wolverine's last resting place that we saw in 2017's Logan, where he got the send-off of a lifetime. And many of us were wondering how the hell this new movie would reintroduce the character after such an incredible last chapter. And this movie answers that question quite bluntly, because it turns out that Deadpool has been looking for Wolverine in order to help save his universe, because after being visited by the Time Variance Authority, he finds out that his universe is in danger, not because he was using time travel shenanigans, okay, to get his own way, but because the anchor being of his universe, his version of Wolverine, aka Logan, had died. And so now he has to find a replacement Logan in the hopes of saving his universe. And that leads him on a path of traveling across the multiverse to find different Wolverines and Logans who can fit the bill to help save his universe, to help save his family of 9 that he loves and cares about. And throughout this journey, we get a really funny and cool sequence of Deadpool meeting different iterations of Wolverine, including one that is portrayed by none other than Henry Cavill. Listen, we will talk about the cameos in this movie in a second, but yes, we did get a Henry Cavill version of Logan, which was hilarious. But there were all different versions. We got the short and stumpy Wolverine as well, which is more comics accurate, which comic book fans have sworn up and down that they would rather see on the big screen, and I vehemently disagree. As we saw in the 2 seconds when he was on screen, it kind of looks a bit wild, okay, let's just say that. And so I'm glad they went down a different route, but we did get a shout out to the original Wolverine's appearance, comic book accurate Wolverine in this movie. Now, unfortunately, Deadpool runs through a bunch of Wolverines that are not adequate enough to fit the bill until he stumbles across a Wolverine who is downtrodden, down on his luck, depressed and completely drunk, and they get along like a house on fire. And he ends up choosing that version of Logan to help save his universe. He returns to the TVA and confronts Mr. Paradox, who is running this division of the TVA, and tells him that this version of Logan is going to help fix everything. But Mr. Paradox doesn't like the sound of that. That wasn't really the deal that they struck, because Mr. Paradox said that Deadpool could be spared because upper management had decided that he was valuable for whatever reason. But Deadpool, being a kind-hearted human being underneath all of that Deadpoolness, didn't want to see his beloved family and universe die. And so he fought tooth and nail to get this Wolverine in, but unfortunately they end up back out of the TVA, shot into the void, which we were first introduced to in Loki season 1, as is pointed out in this movie. Now in the void we are introduced to and reintroduced to a whole bunch of crazy characters, but one of them is the main antagonist of the film, Cassandra Nova, who's portrayed by Emma Corrin, and she is Charles Xavier's twin sister. She's been living out in the void, has created this whole Mad Max empire for herself, and she's in control of a whole bunch of mutants that are living there with her, and she seems to be content. She has her whole thing going, you know, she's just minding her business. But here comes Deadpool. Here comes Deadpool and Wolverine about to wreck everything, and so of course she ends up having to switch gears, especially because Mr. Paradox isn't playing nice and all of a sudden wants to stab her in the back. And so of course she has to enter Deadpool's world and potentially destroy all the other worlds so that the void can end up being the only universe to remain. Like, of course she has to do that. It's not her fault. She was the one that was disturbed. And so ultimately it's up to Deadpool and Wolverine to team up together, work through all their differences, and bring on some brand new teammates along the way in order to save the day. And therein lies the story of Deadpool and Wolverine. Now overall, when it comes to my thoughts on this movie, I had a damn good time. I had a damn good time. It was a success, actually. Yeah. It was a success. It was a damn good movie. I think they did a great job bringing us the extremely highly anticipated entry of Deadpool and Wolverine into the MCU. I think they absolutely delivered on that. But that's not to say that the movie is perfect. That's not to say that it's absolutely impeccable. But before we dive into the mishaps, let's focus on the good first of all. And number one, the best thing about this movie without a doubt is how hilarious it is. It is hilarious. It is so freaking funny. It's just joke after joke after joke after joke. Now, when it comes to my stance on Deadpool, because he is a bit of a controversial figure, even though he's mostly loved, but my stance personally is that a lot of his jokes can be a little bit teenage boy humoresque. Like, you can get the sense that his jokes are a little bit lewd, a little bit over the top, and he's not always telling the like smartest, most intelligent jokes. Like, some of it can be low-hanging fruit. And as someone who does tend to appreciate more like understated British dry humor, like clever jokes, I don't always gel with the character, but he's so charismatically played that I always like the character regardless of if I find every single joke hilarious. We'll get into Ryan Reynolds' performance in a second, but this time around, for the third movie in his franchise, I have to say I was bawling out laughing. I was one on the floor laughing almost the entire time. And these days I have noticed that it's so tough for a movie to make its audience laugh, especially in the cinema. Like I've mentioned before recently that cinemas these days here in the UK are a bit dead sometimes. That they're a bit like the audience really just is not giving up on the laughs that easily. But the showing of this movie was the first time this year where the audience was consistently laughing out loud, just found every single thing hilarious. And that just speaks to the great comedic writing and timing that this movie had to offer. And second of all, you of course had a bunch of jokes about Deadpool entering the MCU and now being owned by Disney. They were all hilarious. I feel like some of them were very inside baseball. Like, you actually have to have known all of the ins and outs of the Disney acquisition in order to fully understand the jokes. So I wonder how mainstream audiences would respond to them, if they would get them. But as someone who has been paying attention to all of this stuff, I really appreciated this shout out. The whole film makes a really big deal about the fact that Deadpool is entering the MCU and he is aware of the gravitas of it himself and he wants to be a hero. You even see when he tried to audition or tried to interview for a role within the Avengers and Happy Hogan and rejected him, but you get the sense that he just wants to be someone. He wants to contribute something that's larger than himself, and when he fails to do so, he hangs up the suit altogether and starts a whole new life as a car salesman with very real hair. But then when he gets the chance to save his universe, to be the hero that he wants to be, that he thinks that Vanessa needs him to be, he rises to that occasion. And of course that gives way for a bunch of really hilarious jokes about Deadpool being in the MCU that just hit the mark almost each and every time. And then thirdly, of course, we had the cameos. The cameos in this movie. Now, I will say, going into this movie, I did not watch a single trailer. Nope. So I came into this pretty much blind, just knowing that it would be Deadpool and Wolverine. And so I was delighted by these cameos because they were truly a whole surprise. First up, like I said, you had Henry Cavill, which was just the shock of my life. Like, I really did not see that coming. I thought he looked good. I thought he looked good as a Logan, but I'm not overly enthusiastic about Henry Cavill actually being the next Wolverine. Like, we need to move on from this man. I'm so sorry, but we can do better. Find someone who's like up and coming, just like Hugh Jackman was when he was cast. Like, find someone else that can make the role his own, because Henry Cavill is, I'm sorry, but like, used goods. I'm sorry, but like, although Deadpool's joke about the way that he was treated by Warner Brothers was hilarious once again, but that doesn't mean I want to see him actually be in the MCU, not even as Captain Britain, as some have speculated. And then of course you had a bunch of cameos in the void, including one by Christopher Jamal Evans. Yes, except it wasn't the cameo that you thought, because instead of being Cap, he was actually Johnny Storm. And listen, I don't know if I've ever said this on the channel, maybe in a very early video, but one of my dreams, okay, one of my dreams for the MCU would be to have Christopher Jamal Evans portraying Cap and Johnny Storm in just one scene. Just give me one scene where they're in the same room together as a sort of nod to all of the comic book characters that Chris Evans has portrayed in the past. Like, just give me one, just give me one. Maybe it can happen in Secret Wars, who knows? But the fact that we got the return of his Johnny Storm in this movie was just like, I was smiling from ear to ear. It was hilarious. Also, the end credit scene. The end credit scene, I died when it was revealed that he actually said all those things about Cassandra Nova. It was just perfection. Like, it was absolutely amazing, because during the film I was like, why is Deadpool saying all of this? Like, he obviously says crazy wacky things all the time, like that's literally his shtick, the merc with the mouth, but like, why is he saying these? They just sound really specific, especially considering he doesn't actually know Cassandra Nova. Like, why is he talking out of his neck like this? But then you get the end credit scene that ties it all the way back, and it's just like the perfect inclusion for the movie. And you could just see Chris Evans laughing out his goddamn face during the entire thing, but he managed to do it. He managed to say it in one take, and that was very, very impressive. And then still in the void, we got a whole host of cameos in the form of the old Fox comic book characters. We got the appearance of Jennifer Garner's Elektra and the noted absence of Ben Affleck's Daredevil. We also got the appearance of none other than Wesley Snipes' Blade. Potentially the only Blade that we get, considering how long it's taken to get the new Blade up and running. But that was insane. I literally did not see that coming. I thought that was really well done. And we of course also got the reappearance of Laura, aka X-23, who was a bright shining star in 2017's Logan. But then we also have none other than Channing Tatum's Gambit. This was crazy. This redemption story almost reaches the level of like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man redemption story in No Way Home. Not quite, but it was truly impressive seeing Channing Tatum in the full Gambit get-up. Now, he did have the crazy, the insane insane accent, which was just, honestly, it was magnifique. I loved every single part of it. But more than anything, I loved the way that they showcased his powers during the action sequence, because it was really great to see what potential this character had. Of course, you know, it was one of the most famous failed projects that were kind of lingering over Fox's head going into the acquisition by Disney. And so to see the character materialize in this movie was just great. And the fact that he got that spotlight and Channing Tatum got to actually portray him in the way that he wanted to all those years back was just amazing. Like, they did a really great job with that one. And not to mention a whole bunch of Deadpools, because yes, this is yet another multiverse project that we have found in this latter stage of the superhero renaissance that we're living in. And Deadpool even makes a comment on that, you know, saying that, you know, the multiverse saga hasn't been great so far. Although he does kindly point to Endgame as a highlight of the multiverse trend, to which I would say the Spider-Verse franchise would like to have a word with you. Now, as great as it was to see all of the different iterations of Deadpool be spotlighted in this movie, I was disappointed that we didn't get enough time with each of the different versions. I would have liked to have seen more from Lady Deadpool or Dogpool, aka Mary Poppins, who was just an icon. What an incredible dog. I love Dogpool so much. Okay, she's so adorable. But yeah, I would have liked to see more from each of the Deadpool characters. Perhaps if they had been Cassandra Nova's henchmen from the beginning, we would have got more time with them and more action sequences with them as well to really highlight each of their different skill sets. But more on that in my critiques. And aside from the writing of the comedy, we of course have the performances themselves, starting us off with Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool, who is just iconic in this role, truly. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of Ryan Reynolds outside of the Deadpool franchise, although he does highlight another one of my favorite Ryan Reynolds performances in the form of The Proposal, which gets a shout out in this movie. I love The Proposal. Oh God. I love The Proposal so much. When he said that, even though I can't even remember the rest of the joke, but I was just like, yes. Like, I was just like, absolutely, is Sandra Bullock gonna show up? Like, I was so excited when he mentioned it. But aside from The Proposal and the Deadpool franchise, like, Ryan Reynolds was just to me, but he's so perfectly suited for this role. And the fact that he knew it from the beginning, even way back when they completely flopped the character, the fact that he knew he was destined to play this role is really awe-inspiring. And to see how hands-on he is with the whole process. He's like a producer on this movie, of course, but he's also one of its writers. Like, he is involved, he is embedded in this character. He's really made it his own, and it's tough to imagine anyone else taking up the helm. So yeah, Ryan Reynolds absolutely knocks it out of the park as Deadpool. The comedic moments, the physicality, although we don't often see him in the suit itself, but I presume it's not a Pedro Pascal situation. Like, I presume that it really is him underneath the mask because he has such ownership over the character. But also the emotional beats as well, because this movie does have a lot of heart to it, and he definitely delivers on that front too, like properly doing some actoring here, which is really great to see. So you can tell how much Ryan Reynolds really loves this character and treats it with the utmost care and respect. It really shows through the screen, and thankfully the film overall is a success, and so he did it proud. But then of course you have the flip side with the return of Hugh Jackman's Logan, aka Wolverine. Now, I have to be honest, I've never been the biggest fan of Wolverine. I've never been the biggest fan of the X-Men franchise to begin with, although of course there are some standouts, like, please, you know the ones. But I have to say, like, I've never been gagged over Wolverine. Like, and I've always found it annoying how the franchise felt so limited to having him as a protagonist when there were so many different, incredible, exciting and interesting characters to explore in the X-Men universe. I always found him to be like a sort of barrier from them expanding upon the universe and exploring these different characters, because they constantly wanted him to have so much of a presence in the stories. So yeah, I actually wasn't the biggest Wolverine fan, but that had nothing to do with Hugh Jackman himself, who, much like Ryan Reynolds, is synonymous with the character of Wolverine at this point. Like, he is Wolverine. And so obviously I recognize that it's a huge deal that he returned, especially after having such a triumphant ending to his story in Logan from 2017. But return he did. The paycheck was humongous, and so Hugh Jackman got jacked once more and popped on the iconic yellow suit, and he has literally never looked better. Hugh Jackman in this movie made me a huge Wolverine fan. Like, I'm sorry, I was fangirling. Yes, I was fangirling the entire time. Like, I just couldn't believe it. He's so amazing. I finally see the vision. Like, it took me 20 years, but I finally see the vision. Hugh Jackman is Wolverine. Wow. And there's even that incredibly emotional line that Deadpool / Ryan Reynolds says, where he says that, like, you are the best Wolverine that there is. And you get the sense that he's not just talking to Wolverine, but he's also talking to his friend Hugh Jackman as well. Like, it was just perfection. And similarly to Deadpool, Wolverine also has some very emotional moments here as well, but not because he is at risk of losing his universe and family, but instead because he's already lost it. He's already lost everything because he wasn't able to help the rest of the X-Men save his world. And that's why when we are first introduced to him, he's drinking up a storm. Like, he is drunk and barely present because he doesn't want to be present. He's going through a lot. But by the end of the film, he's given the opportunity to save Deadpool's world, and that helps him feel a sense of redemption. Now, do I think that his appearance here has smeared the legacy of the 2017 movie? Absolutely not. I mean, first of all, this isn't the same Wolverine, because remember, it's the multiverse. So they found a way to not damage the reputation of our Wolverine, the Wolverine that we've known for 20 years, because he is still dead and buried, although his grave was desecrated. His grave was disturbed by Deadpool, and his body was used as a weapon from bone to bone, which was insane. But, you know, his memory is still intact. But this new Wolverine presents us with the opportunity to get the return of Hugh Jackman, and boy, did they take advantage of that. Now, if I did have any complaint about Wolverine's portrayal in this movie, it would be that he doesn't really have that many lines in the film itself. Like, he barely talks. But to be fair, Wolverine has never been a character of many words, and then you pair him up alongside the Merc with a mouth, and, you know, all chaos ensues, and not many words need to be said by Wolverine himself. So it does make sense, but I was just surprised at how few words Hugh Jackman ended up saying in this movie. Now that we've dived into the heroes of the story, it's time to get into the villains. It's time to get into the bad guys, and not the morally ambiguous ones either. First one up we have is Cassandra Nova, who's portrayed by Emma Corrin, and I thought that Emma Corrin did a really great job as this character. She's very sneaky, snarky, super intelligent. You can tell that she's related to Charles Xavier, but because she's never really been connected to him and she's never lived with him, she doesn't have that same moral compass that he has, although his is often compromised as well, but that's a different story. But yeah, she makes for a really compelling character. Now, whether the script actually makes use of this character in the best way is something to be discussed in my critiques, but I do think that Emma Corrin knocked her performance out of the park, and that's visual of her taking control and getting into people's minds was disgusting and horrific, but also really unique to the character, because we've seen a lot of telepathic characters across the MCU and superhero landscape overall, but you know, Cassandra Nova's abilities kind of shine as a very unique way of conveying this trait. And then Then, of course, you had Matthew Macfadyen as Mr. Paradox, the TVA worker who's working on this gizmo, this MacGuffin, that could potentially destroy the multiverse. Now, he wants to use it as a way of controlling the multiverse and different timelines, unbeknownst to the very top of the TVA. Paradox has gone rogue. He has his own operation going on, unbeknownst to B15, and so he's working on this machine that could give him immense power and go against the general direction of the TVA post Loki season 2. Now, Matthew Macfadyen in this role is really great. Like, he's absolutely hilarious. He's the typical sniveling British villain that we have seen time and time again, but he's kind of cranking it up to an 11, right? Like, being particularly sniveling, particularly conniving, but also pathetic. Like, also like a bit of a whinger, a bit of a moaner. His voice is all like high pitched and just annoying. He kind of reminds me of Mark Ruffalo's character from Poor Things. But it was just a shock to have Matthew Macfadyen's British accent on display here after so many years of having him portray an American character in Succession. It was just a nice little surprise that he went full English for this one. Now, another thing that I loved about this film was its ode to the Fox Marvel universe. It really did give it a proper send-off, and I thought that was really heartening to see. Not only for the cameos of the Fox Marvel characters like Johnny Storm and Blade and Elektra. Let's not forget that these are the characters and the franchises that brought about the superhero renaissance of the early 21st century that we're experiencing, and so it's great to see them being paid homage in this movie and getting a proper send-off, a proper ending, as they said in the film. But then you also had a bunch of amazing moments between Deadpool and Wolverine, especially near the end of the film where they make the ultimate sacrifice to save Deadpool's universe. That doesn't end up being necessary because the two of them together managed to survive, much like the ending of Guardians of the Galaxy. But yeah, it's the thought that counts. They thought it was going to be the end. It ultimately wasn't, but man, was it an amazing send-off. And then finally, you have the clip that plays over the credits with all of the behind the scenes footage from like 20 plus years ago with a young Hugh Jackman and all of the cast of the X-Men movies. Like, oh, that made me really emotional. Again, I was never really a huge X-Men fan to begin with, and I didn't watch these films 20 years ago. Like, I was barely alive. But seeing it all play out in that clip was just really heartening. It made me so happy to see the Fox universe get a proper send-off all those years after Disney purchased it, because we don't want to talk about Dark Phoenix, even though Sophie Turner did get a quick cameo in the clip. Overall, I had a really great time with this movie, but there were a few things that were less than perfect. Starting off with the plot. Starting off with the story itself, I have to say, I thought the story was pretty weak. I was actually quite disappointed that there wasn't more to it. And it doesn't help that, as Deadpool himself points out, the plot of this movie is very similar to that of Loki season 1 episode 5, where Loki ended up in the void at the end of time as well. And of course, we already had that amazing moment of old Loki, portrayed by Richard E. Grant, making the ultimate sacrifice against Goliath and in the void at the end of time. So we've already had a pretty cool, comprehensive storyline explored in the void in Loki season 1, and this felt like an inferior version of that. So I don't know why they would try to revisit this. I don't know why they didn't bother to create something new and fresh, a whole new world, for instance. Like, I don't know why they decided to just copy and paste the plot of that episode onto this movie. It made the movie feel less cinematic because there was only enough story for an episode of a series. It didn't feel like a cinematic story, a story that felt bigger than television. And so it definitely felt like they were working backwards. You know, they knew the outcome that they wanted from this movie with the emergence of Deadpool and Wolverine in the MCU, but then they just kind of had to figure out how to make that happen. and that part is the weaker part of the film to me. Now, to be fair, this isn't really a huge shock because the Deadpool movies have never been plot heavy. The stories tend to be quite loosely defined. They tend to be kind of short elevator pitches that gets Deadpool from point A to point B to point C whilst making all of his wacky observations and fourth wall breaking. But I just found it to be particularly disappointing because this is such a big deal, you know, having Deadpool in the MCU and joined by Wolverine, no less. Like, I just feel like that occasion deserved a better story and better writing all around. But that's just me. Even the way that the characters were written was pretty disappointing. I wanted a little bit more from Wolverine, for instance, especially considering he was coming to terms with the fact that he, you know, didn't help his team. He let down the X-Men and therefore the whole world. I wanted a bit more gravitas, a bit more substance from that, and the writing just was lacking. For instance, Wolverine very easily forgives Deadpool for lying about the fact that he could potentially help restore his universe. Like, that's kind of a big deal. That's kind of a big deal, but I feel like they kind of overlook that and dismiss it for the sake of getting the two to pair up. But in reality, there should have been a little bit more hostility and animosity between them, not just through the fighting, but just, you know, in terms of building tension and genuine disagreement. And even if it wouldn't be, you know, completely hilarious and haha funny, but just giving us a bit of genuine tension and resentment from Wolverine towards Deadpool would have added a bit more weight and made the arc of their friendship and their storyline more significant. But instead we get these physical fights that break out between Deadpool and Wolverine, and whilst it's cool seeing the two fight against each other, I don't know, there wasn't a lot of like feeling and emotion behind it because that wasn't really written into the script. It kind of felt like the two were fighting because it was time. Like the script said insert action sequence here, and so that's why they were fighting. You didn't get the sense that there was a build-up of tension. Like, for instance, we got in the first Avengers movie, right, where there was already disagreement, there was already a clash of ideologies, and so when the Avengers disagreed with each other or ended up fighting against each other in Civil War, like, there was a lot of weight and meaning behind that. You don't really get that same weight here when Deadpool and Wolverine are fighting. You just get the sense that it's time to fight in the script, and so here you go, nerds. And side note, I found the action sequences overall to be a little bit disappointing, if I'm being honest. Like, it was cool seeing Deadpool fight, especially with Wolverine's bones. I found that to be the most memorable part of any of these action sequences. But overall, there was a lot of like dodgy CGI, a lot of bendy and elastic Wolverines and Deadpools fighting. They felt like animated characters. They didn't really feel real and substantial, I'm afraid. And also the action sequences weren't like the most spectacularly choreographed. They didn't have any iconic scenes like the first Deadpool movie on that bridge, for instance. But anyways, back to the bad writing. The villains. The villains, yeah, their motives were pretty piss poor, I'm afraid. Like, I wish they had done more with both Matthew McFadyen and Emma Corrin's characters. Like, there was potential there, but we never dug deeper into their motives, into their mindsets, into them as people. And that's a shame, really. It's a shame. It would be tough to do in one film. I mean, not to compare like the first Avengers movie to this, where Loki already had a whole movie to explore his motives, and so that definitely helped. But even just within the first Avengers movie, you got a better sense of who Loki was in comparison to Paradox or even Cassandra Nova in this film. So yeah, I would say that they made for pretty weak villains, not because of their performances, but just because of the writing that didn't really bother to delve in deeper. But again, the Deadpool movies aren't really known for having great villains. Like, I genuinely cannot remember who the villains were of the previous films, so I shouldn't be surprised, but I just expected more considering how huge of a deal this whole movie is. And finally, I wanted to touch on the soundtrack, which overall I did enjoy, but again, similar similarly to the action sequences, it felt like the soundtrack was very much insert music here. Like, it didn't feel like it blended very well into the film, apart from the presence of Like a Prayer. Madonna's Like a Prayer was a welcome addition to the soundtrack. I've been singing this song all afternoon in my head, okay? So I really liked that, but otherwise the other song choices were a little bit, it wasn't really the song choices, it was more the way that they were inserted kind of sporadically. It didn't feel like it didn't feel like it meshed as well as it could have. I don't know. Am I being too nitpicky? You guys let me know. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Deadpool and Wolverine a cheeky first timer 7.8 out of 10. I don't usually dip out of the 5s and 0s for my scoring system, but I couldn't quite give it an 8 because the writing is just not there. But that's it from me, guys. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Deadpool and Wolverine, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.